In 1981, during a late summer sleepover on Willow Lane, a 9-year-old girl vanished sometime between midnight and morning. Her shoes were still by the door, her jacket was still hanging by the stairs, and her friends said they never heard her leave. For over 4 decades, the house kept its silence. But in 2025, when a young couple started tearing out old drywall, they uncovered something sealed shut behind the laundry room wall. Something small. Something that had waited. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury. And make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Heather Whitlow. I'm 41, born and raised just outside of Dayton, Ohio. My husband Darren and I moved into that house on Willow Lane in early February of 2025. We'd been looking for a place we could fix up ourselves, something simple, affordable, nothing fancy. The kind of place where the bones are good, even if the wiring needs help. This house had been sitting empty for almost a year. A little ranch-style home with faded green siding, a crooked mailbox, and an overgrown lawn. It had history sure most houses in that neighborhood did. But we weren't looking for charm. We were looking for square footage, good plumbing, and something under budget. This one had all three. The bank had repossessed it after 3 failed flips. One buyer pulled out mid-renovation. Another said it gave them bad dreams, whatever that meant. When we walked in for the showing, the place did feel stale. Like the air had been held in place too long. But I chalked it up to old carpet and closed windows. Every room smelled like drywall dust and nicotine. Darren said it just needed a good airing out. We started work the same week we moved in, stripped out the linoleum-pulled staples from the subfloor, knocked out some of the older cabinets in the laundry room. Bit by bit, we were bringing it back to life. I didn't think much about the creaking or the odd hum that came and went behind the walls. Old houses settle, pipes rattle. I told myself that more than once. Still, there were little things. Darren swore the thermostat kept resetting itself to 70. I'd hear something tapping near the dryer when no one was in the room. I remember standing in the hallway one night, everything quiet, and hearing what I thought was a sigh behind the vent. Soft. Almost wet. But when I went to check, there was nothing there. It wasn't threatening, not at first. Just unsettling. Like the house was holding its breath. Then came the laundry room. We were clearing out shelving along the back wall, cheap plywood nailed into warped studs when Darren stopped squinting at the paneling. He ran his hand along a jagged seam, said it didn't match the rest of the wall. There, just behind the water heater and tucked low to the floor, was a thin outline, about 3 feet high, maybe 2 feet across. He tapped it with the back of the hammer. Hollow. I didn't move. Just stared at it while he started unscrewing the trim. I remember crossing my arms and feeling that prickle you get when something's about to go wrong. He said the inspector found no crawl space under this side of the house. I said. Darren didn't answer right away. Just muttered, he missed a few things. By the time the last screw came out, I was already kneeling with a flashlight. We hadn't opened it yet. That little door was still shut, sealed with old paint and brittle caulk. But the air around it had changed. Heavier somehow. Colder. Like it was waiting. That's where we left it that night. And that's where everything else began. Darren opened the crawl space door just past 10 the next morning. The last of the screws gave way with a dry pop, and the panel creaked open like it had been holding its breath. The air that spilled out was cold and still, but not clean. It smelled like wet wood-rusted nails and something older like insulation left to rot behind walls. He held the door open while I crouched beside him with the flashlight, the beam cutting through layers of dust that looked like they hadn't moved in decades. At first, all I saw was dark, then plastic, thin sheeting strung between low rafters sagging with time. And just beyond that color, something small and fabric slumped against the far wall. It took a moment to understand what I was looking at. A child's backpack, purple, faded, trimmed in pink. The kind I remembered from my own school years, early 80s, with the outline of a cartoon cat on the front eyes, scratched off by time or mold. Darren said something behind me, but I don't think I responded. I just stared. He reached in and pulled the bag closer. The space groaned under his weight, but he didn't stop. Dust came off in a cloud, made me cough into my sleeve. The zipper was rusted, but still intact. Inside were a few folded school papers curled with moisture damage, a small plastic comb, 2 dirty socks balled together, and something wrapped in a pale hand towel. Darren unrolled it slowly. It was a camera. A silver Minolta 110 compact, the kind that used cartridge film. It was cold to the touch, and older than either of us had expected. The film door was still shut. He looked at me, and I knew before either of us said it we needed to call someone. I was already dialing when he set the backpack down gently, like it still belonged to someone. Then he stepped back and looked again. His face changed. I followed his eyes. There was something else in there. Not an object exactly. Not something you could hold. It was an impression. A hollow in the dirt, about the size of a child curled up on her side. The outline was faint, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. The crawl space had once held something living, or something that had been. By the time the police arrived, the sun had dropped behind the oak trees out front, and the temperature had dipped with it. We stood in the driveway while 2 local officers and 1 woman from the Columbus cold case unit walked through the laundry room. Her name was Detective Val Mercer. She didn't say much, just listened while I told the story twice. She stayed quiet until forensics started marking the crawl space and cataloging what we'd found. Then she turned to me and asked, "Anyone ever tell you about this house?" I said no, just that it was a foreclosure. Bank-owned. Her eyes stayed on the dark opening behind the yellow tape. Back in 1981, a little girl went missing on this street. From this house. Sleepover. 7 girls. 1 never woke up. I asked her name. Lori Ann West, 9 years old. Her parents had claimed she must have left in the night, but her shoes were still at the door, her jacket still hanging. She was just gone. No sign of forced entry, no charges filed, no leads. The house changed owners a few times after that. Nobody stayed long. That night we were told we couldn't stay either. The scene was sealed. Crime scene tape stretched across the laundry room like a warning. Darren and I packed a bag and sat in the car until we figured out where to go. I remember asking, "What if she was in there this whole time?" He didn't answer, just stared at the house with a look I hadn't seen before. Inside the crawlspace door stood open again, black and breathless. Back in Columbus, Val sat under fluorescent lights in a windowless office, the evidence bag on the desk in front of her. The film cartridge was being rushed to Quantico. It was over 40 years old, and no one knew if it had survived. She pulled up the original case file, scanned the statements from the sleepover. One girl said she'd heard something in the wall. A whisper near the dryer said there was a secret door. Val closed the report and stared at the bag. If the film developed, maybe they'd finally know what Lori saw that night. What no one had believed. The lab at Quantico was built to recover things most people had given up on: water-damaged footage, burned negatives, crushed tape reels. This one was different. It hadn't been exposed to light in over 4 decades. The technician on duty, a man in his 60s, said the negatives looked cloudy but intact. Could be mold, could be gold. It took 2 hours to extract 5 usable frames. Val sat in silence as the images loaded one by one on the screen. The first was a living room. Dated. Console TV. Beanbag chair. 7 sleeping bags arranged in a loose circle, little heads barely visible. Timestamp 9:13 p.m. One girl was sitting up mid-laugh. It looked like Lori. Second image. 9:17 p.m. Same room. TV off. Blurry motion in the top left corner. A shadow. Third frame closer to the laundry room. Tilted. Shot low to the ground. A boot adult-sized, just stepping into frame. Heavy. Fourth photo, almost nothing. Black with a faint contrast in the middle. A face. Childlike. Wide eyes. A hand covering the mouth. Timestamp had jumped to 12:46 a.m. Val sat back. 5th frame clearest of them all. From inside the crawl space. Camera pointed toward the opening. A flashlight beam caught one detail. A small shoe. Purple laced. Just one. It was a photograph of someone being buried. A photo of the moment it happened. That night Val called me. Told me not to look at the images unless I was ready. She'd bring the prints by in the morning. Her voice didn't rise, didn't shake, just said, "It's not good." Before she went home, she drove to the far edge of town. The house was small. Pale siding, rusted awning, 3 steps that sagged in the middle. Lori's mother still lived there. When she answered the door, she didn't look surprised, just tired. Val handed her the envelope without a word. The woman opened it slowly, one photo at a time, until she reached the last one. She didn't cry, just stared. After a while, she said, "She told me, the week before it happened. She said the house had a mouth, that something behind the wall was watching her." She tapped the photo. "That's her shoe. She only wore those when she was scared." Val nodded. Said they were reopening the case. That she needed to find the other girls from that sleepover. All 7. They saw something the mother said, even if they forgot, even if they lied. They saw. That night Val sat at her desk and wrote down their names. 7 girls, 1 house, and 1 roll of film that proved a child didn't disappear. She'd been taken, and the house had been waiting for someone to listen. The next morning, Val met with the first girl on her list. Stephanie Geller, now 53, married, living outside Newark. An elementary school counselor. She agreed to meet. Her voice on the phone had been clipped, nervous. In person, her hands kept tightening around her coffee cup. "I never thought I'd talk about this again," she said, "but I remember." She said Lori hadn't liked the movie that night. The puppets were too creepy. She wanted to watch something else. They switched tapes. Lori curled up in the corner, looked sad. Later, there was a scream. Not loud, just sharp, like someone being surprised. Stephanie and another girl, Heather Jarvis sat up. The laundry room light was on. Stephanie walked toward it thinking maybe Lori had gone to the bathroom, but the light turned off before she got there. She opened the door anyway. It was pitch black, she said, and I heard breathing. Wet. Close. She slammed the door and went back to her sleeping bag. Told Heather everything was fine. They never spoke of it again. Val handed her the photo. The one from inside the crawl space. Stephanie looked at it and whispered, "That's the door." That's where she went. She wasn't the only one who remembered. And Val wasn't done knocking. One by one, the names on that list would start to talk, or break, or disappear. But something had already shifted. The silence wasn't holding. Not anymore. Heather Jarvis was next. She lived in Cincinnati now, 2 kids recently divorced, working part-time at a preschool. When I called, she hesitated before agreeing to meet, and when I showed her the printouts from the crawlspace film, she stepped out of the room and vomited in the kitchen sink. She came back a few minutes later, didn't sit down, just leaned against the counter with both hands braced like she was keeping herself upright. She said she remembered a shape in the hallway that night. Not a face, not a voice, just a presence. Something tall moving past the edge of the sleeping bags. At the time, she thought it was Lori's father maybe checking on them. But now she wasn't sure. She said she'd told herself for years that memory was a dream, that if she believed it hard enough, it might stay that way. After Heather, I reached out to Robin Ames. Her number went straight to voicemail for 2 days. Then I got a letter from a law office in Cleveland. She had no comment, no recollection, and no intention of participating. The letter was short, cold. I didn't push. Megan Holloway was different. She broke down before I even asked a question. She said she remembered seeing a man at the sleepover just for a second. She thought he was one of the dads. Someone's uncle, maybe. She couldn't describe his face, only that he wore gloves. She said she remembered them more than anything. Black leather. Not winter gloves. Not the kind for yard work. Just gloves. She said she hadn't told anyone. Not back then. Not ever. She didn't want to get anyone in trouble. Julie Rhee barely spoke during the interview. Her hands stayed folded in her lap the entire time, eyes fixed on the table. She answered the basic questions. Yes, she'd been there. Yes, she remembered Lori. But beyond that, she wouldn't say. Just nodded or shook her head. After I left, I drove back to Columbus thinking that would be the end of it. But that night there was a voicemail on my desk line. It was Julie. Her voice was thin and shaking. I lied, she said. We all did. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. She wasn't supposed to disappear. But someone let him in, one of the adults. Then the line went dead. No name, no return number. Just those last words. I played it 3 times before I sat down. One of the adults. The next morning, I went back to Willow Lane. Heather Whitlow was in the backyard trying to dig up what looked like half-frozen soil. She said she was keeping busy. Said she hadn't gone near the laundry room since the crawl space was sealed. The smell's gone, she said, but the house still remembers. I didn't go inside right away. I walked the perimeter first. The outside of the house looked like any other. Siding was older but clean. Gutters new. I made my way around to the far side and crouched by the base of the wall just past the corner where the laundry room sat. That's when I noticed it. A narrow vent, maybe 6 inches high, almost rusted shut. but the dirt beneath it had been disturbed like something had been pushed out from inside. I stood there a long time staring at the rust, thinking about how easy it would have been to miss. That afternoon, I pulled the original case files again. Back in '81, Lori's father, David West, had been questioned and cleared. He was a shift supervisor at the local paper mill. Said he left for work before dinner came home after the police had already arrived. His alibi had checked out. His wife Helen said he'd kissed Lori goodnight before heading out. Nothing seemed off, but there was a note in the file, almost nothing, just one line. David told officers he'd heard a door close downstairs as he was leaving. Said he figured it was Gerald, his brother, heading out the back. Gerald West had been staying with them that weekend. Unemployed. History of mental illness. He'd been blamed for a few minor incidents around town. Vandalism. Trespassing. Never anything violent. He died in 1992, suicide in a motel room outside Akron. No family came to claim the body. The file listed just 3 items in the motel's inventory: a plastic comb, a child's shoe, and a photograph of Lori. The back of the photo had one sentence written in blue ink. "You did good, brother. She's quiet now." That stopped me. Gerald had the backpack comb, the one we pulled from the crawl space. But the message suggested something else, someone else. He hadn't acted alone. He'd been instructed, used. The crawl space hadn't been the end of anything. It had been the start. That night, Heather called again. She said she heard it a second time. The humming. It was after midnight. Darren was asleep. She was walking down the hall when she heard it low, steady, like a soft vibration behind the wall. She went into the laundry room. The dryer was unplugged, but it was shaking. Not much, just enough to notice. She pulled it forward and found another seam in the drywall. Smaller than the crawl space door. Flatter, but still a panel. She didn't open it, just stood there, one hand on the machine, listening. The next morning, I was back at the house with 2 officers and a forensics tech from Columbus. Heather stayed in the hallway while we cleared the room. The panel behind the dryer wasn't part of the original layout. No permit record, no construction file. It had been added later, maybe months, maybe years. I watched as the tech ran a scanner along the wall. He said there was something metal behind it, small, and wires, possibly a power source, possibly a camera. We opened the panel slowly, using a pry tool to lift the edge without cracking the surface. The wood came loose with a soft sigh, like the house had been waiting to exhale. Behind it, we found a shallow recess, about the size of a suitcase. Bolted to the studs was an old Rialto recorder, military surplus, early '80s. It had been wired to an external battery pack, now corroded. But the reel was still in place. I asked if we could play it. The tech said it would take hours to clean. Maybe longer. I told him to send it to Quantico. No shortcuts. No mistakes. That afternoon, I sat in my office and laid everything out: the crawl space, the girls' testimonies, Gerald's suicide, the printout from the motel, and now this, a recording device, installed behind the laundry wall, in a house where a child had gone missing. I stared at the timeline, the photographs, the old blueprints. There was one sentence I wrote on the whiteboard. All caps. Red marker. Someone let him in. Gerald couldn't have walked into a house full of children during a sleepover without someone noticing. Not in a small town. Not in that neighborhood. Which meant someone had invited him. and someone had helped him leave. David West had said he heard a door, but what if Gerald had never left? What if David had walked right past him knowing exactly what was about to happen? The FBI confirmed the next morning that the fingerprints on the crawlspace hatch matched Gerald West. But there was another partial print, one from the inside of the new panel. It wasn't Gerald's. I requested a comparison, sent it to the State Employment Records Office, and asked them to run it against David West's file. And I waited. That evening, Quantico called. The tape had been cleaned. It was playable. The first few minutes were static, then a child's voice. Soft. Mom, mom. Then a sound, nails, maybe scraping wood. Breathing. A mechanical whine. Music. A lullaby. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Warped. Slowing down. Then a man's voice. Just one line. A whisper. If you lie again, you'll go where she went. I took the headphones off. Didn't say anything for a long time. Then I asked the tech if that was all. He said no. There was something else, fainter, buried beneath the man's voice. A second whisper. Female, older. She knows too much. I played that part 5 times, slowed it, cleaned it, and each time it said the same thing. She knows too much. Gerald had built the crawl space. David had kept the house quiet. But someone else had been there too. Someone who hadn't spoken yet, but whose voice had been caught. And now we had her. Almost. I listened to that tape a dozen times before I allowed myself to believe what I was hearing. The child's voice. Lori's was shaky, maybe crying, whispering for her mom. The music box kicked in after that, and then came David's voice, low and firm. If you lie again, you'll go where she went. But layered just under that, almost buried in static, was the second voice. A woman's. Not panicked, not afraid, just quiet. Like she was offering instruction, not comfort. She knows too much. It wasn't a recording glitch, not an echo. It was real. She'd been in that crawl space too, or just beside it. Long enough to be heard. Long enough to say something. I started with Helen West. I'd spoken to her before briefly after the photos were developed, but I hadn't questioned her directly about her husband or that night. I hadn't wanted to push until I had something that would hold. Now I did. I showed up at her door just after 9 the next morning. She opened it wearing the same pale pink sweater from the week before, her hair pulled back in a tight, clean clip. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice didn't. "You again," she said. I told her I had follow-up questions. She let me in without asking what kind. The living room was exactly as I remembered. Quiet, over-decorated, heavy with the scent of dried lavender. She sat slowly on the edge of the couch, spine, straight knees together. "You want a confession?" she said, not looking at me. "Should you give one?" I asked. Her mouth twitched. She folded her hands in her lap. I didn't kill her. I didn't even know what David had done until years later. Not until the anniversary. 5 years, I think. He got drunk. Said he hadn't meant to. That she screamed and he panicked. I asked what she did with that information. She looked up then. I told him never to say it again. I told him if he loved what was left of our family, he'd keep it buried. I stayed quiet. Let her keep talking. You don't understand, she said. He told me she let Gerald in. He said she unlocked the side gate and opened the vent. That's what started it. He said she'd been warned, that she disobeyed. She looked at me like I was supposed to agree. Like any of that made sense. You covered for him, I said. You stayed married to a man who buried your daughter under your home. Her jaw tightened. I protected what was left. My son. My name. I took out the audio transcript, set it on the table between us. The voice on the tape, I said, after David's. That was you. Her eyes stayed on the paper. It's faint, she said. You can't know that. It's you, I said again. You were near that crawl space the night Lori died. Maybe in the room, maybe watching. But you said it. She knows too much. There was a long pause. Then Helen leaned back slightly, her arms loosening. She had the camera, she said quietly. She'd taken pictures. She told me the day before, said she'd seen something she shouldn't have. David's darkroom. I think she found it. Her voice grew thinner, like something was unraveling. It wasn't supposed to happen. Not like that. He just lost control. And then he made it sound like she was at fault, like she let the wrong person in. I asked again about the darkroom. She didn't answer, just stood slowly and motioned for me to follow her downstairs. The basement was finished in the front half-wood paneling, old furniture, a treadmill that hadn't been plugged in years. But in the back, tucked behind a closet door, there was a narrow stairwell that led into a second space. Not on the floor plan. Not in the records. It dropped about 6 feet into what had once been a root cellar. The air was stale and damp, thick with the scent of old photochemicals. In the corner was a rusted Sears brand in larger empty trays, yellowing paper curled at the edges. A single red light bulb dangled from the ceiling by a frayed wire. In the far corner was a cabinet. Inside were hundreds of photographs. Most were small, square-edged. Some were negatives. I pulled on gloves and started laying them out. Almost all were of children. Unposed, blurry. Most were asleep. A few were looking straight at the camera. Some were taken from vents, through closets, from the other side of mirrors. One was Lori brushing her teeth, half-dressed. Time-stamped September 10th, 10:14 p.m. 2 days before she vanished. I bagged every photo, every sheet of paper, every unprocessed roll. Helen sat on the bottom step. She didn't move. He said it wasn't about hurting them, she murmured. Said he just liked the stillness. Said it made him feel in control. I turned back toward her. And you let him stay, I said. You let him build this. You let him keep taking pictures. She didn't answer. At the station, I had the prints scanned, cataloged, and flagged for comparison with missing child reports statewide. We'd start with local schools, work outward. If even one of those children hadn't been reported missing, I'd find out why. Gerald West had been unstable, but he wasn't the mastermind. David had kept the record, built the crawl space. And Helen, she'd known about it for years. She hadn't just ignored the signs. She'd helped hide them. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat down in front of the evidence board and looked at the map again. One red string led from Lori to Gerald, another from Gerald to the crawl space. and a third now from Helen to the dark room. But something still didn't line up. That second voice, the one on the tape. The tone was wrong. It wasn't scared. It wasn't warning David. It was reminding him. That's what stuck with me. Not panic, control. I went back to the crawl space alone just after midnight. The room had been resealed, drywall redone, forensics finished. The tiles were clean now, but I sat on the floor in front of where the panel had been and said just 3 words. I believe you. The air in the room shifted, just slightly. A creak sounded behind the wall. Not loud, like someone adjusting their weight. Then another voice. Not Lori's, not Helen's. Low, dry, barely above a breath. I'm not the only one. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there listening while the house held its silence around me. Whoever she was, wherever she was, she hadn't left. Not yet. And if she was still there, I needed to know her name. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. Not. I spent most of the next 3 days buried in records. Property filings, blueprints, old land surveys, anything tied to 27 Willow Lane before, during, or after 1981. I wasn't just looking for the girl who whispered, "I'm not the only one." I needed to know who she meant. The crawl space had been searched, documented, resealed. But if there was even the possibility that someone else had been down there, lived down there, then the house itself held more than we'd accounted for. What I found was buried in a microfiche reel from 1979, a contractor permit labeled Ventilation Retrofit, signed by David West. It authorized the addition of in-wall utility access dry corridors and substructural modifications for private storage. No reason listed, no architectural oversight, no inspection records. But there it was, clear as day. He'd built hidden access points throughout the house 2 years before Lori disappeared. And not for maintenance. There were no corresponding permits for plumbing, HVAC, or foundation work. He had built spaces meant to be entered, used, and sealed from within. The next morning, I went back to the house alone. The Whitlows had left weeks earlier. The windows were covered in dust, the air stale. I didn't need to open the crawl space again, not yet. I wanted to check something else. In the guest bedroom closet, where Heather had once found an old chute sealed behind insulation, I pulled back the new paneling and slipped inside. The passage ran narrow at first, maybe 2 feet wide, but then dipped low and crooked into a chamber that hadn't been documented. It was silent in a way I hadn't felt before, like the air itself had weight. No light, no wires, just dry plaster and the smell of dust and something metallic. Along the back wall were drawings, dozens of them. Crayon pencils scratched into the drywall, stick figures mostly. Girls with wide, round eyes, one in a box. Another peeking out from behind what looked like a wall. A tall figure without a face stood above them, and beneath one image a phrase was repeated, "Don't cry where he can hear." In the corner of the room sat a pile of old belongings, a blanket printed with faded Care Bears, a plastic cup with a cracked rim, a broken doll head, and a beaded bracelet. I lifted it carefully. Plastic alphabet beads, M-A-R-Y. I backed out slowly, marked the location for forensics, and called it in. By mid-afternoon, I had confirmation from dispatch Marianne Gutierrez. Last seen July 1980. Age 7. vanished while walking home from her babysitter's house in Mansfield. No suspects, no physical evidence, no connection to the West family on file. Until now. Her family had moved out of state in the late 80s. Her file had been dormant for decades. But the bracelet, that was hers. And the drawings, they weren't Lori's. Lori had been 9 in 1981. These had been made earlier. Less confident. Younger hand. Someone had been kept in that crawl space before Lori ever saw it. I went back through everything, every item, every timestamp, every old photo from the darkroom. Most were unlabeled. But one taken from what looked like a ceiling vent captured a child sitting cross-legged on the floor with her back to the camera. Next to her on her wrist, the same bracelet. Bright pink beads. Same order. Same plastic clasp. The crawl space hadn't just hidden Lori's body, it had held Mary, and someone else had known she was there. That night I drove out to the cemetery. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find. Lori's grave had been added only after her remains were identified. Simple granite polished flat. Lori Ann West, 1972-1981. Found 2025. Someone had left fresh flowers. But there was something else. A music box. Old. Metal. Sitting beneath the headstone. When I opened it, the sound was clean. Not warped like the one on the tape. Same song, though Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Inside the lid was a folded slip of paper. The handwriting was small, uneven, childish. She's not done. Underneath, in a separate line, she remembers who helped. I stood still for a long time. Wind moved through the grass behind me, but the lot was empty. No other cars. Whoever left the note had been there recently, and they knew things that hadn't been made public. Back at my desk, I pulled the case logs again. David West was in custody. Gerald was dead. Helen was under protective watch. But there was one name I hadn't looked into, someone peripheral, someone who might have been dismissed as harmless. Ruth Delaney, Lori's former Sunday school teacher, lived just 3 houses down, had testified in 1981 that the Wests were a godly family. I searched her name against local service logs, found something small, an old neighborhood watch entry listing Ruth as a key holder to multiple homes on Willow Lane, including 27. I cross-referenced with Marianne Gutierrez's missing person file. Ruth Delaney had once babysat her, same year, same block. I left a message with her landline, no voicemail, just a click. The next morning I drove out to her house. Still the same old brick ranch, same white trim, same angel statue leaning sideways in the garden bed. The porch light was on, though it was barely past sunrise. I knocked twice. No answer. I knocked again. The porch swing creaked behind me. When I turned, the door opened. Ruth stood there in a housecoat, thin eyes pale and sunken hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I figured you'd come," she said. Her voice was hoarse, lined with phlegm. I introduced myself again. She didn't ask why I was there, just said, "Come in before the cold gets you." Inside, her kitchen smelled like canned soup and mothballs, old wallpaper peeling in the corners. Religious paintings lined the hallway, lambs, doves, a crooked crucifix over the coat rack. She offered me a seat. I declined. I asked if she remembered Marianne. She was quiet, she said. Liked stories. Used to ask if she could sleep under the table. I never asked why. I asked if she remembered when Mary went missing. Ruth nodded. She came back that night, after she vanished, but not outside, in the window. Like her reflection stayed even when her body didn't. She looked at me with something that wasn't quite fear. She said something I didn't understand back then. Said, "She took me, not him." I asked who she was. Ruth didn't speak right away. Then finally, she said it. Helen. She hated that girl. Said she was soft, too emotional. David wanted a boy. Helen wanted someone who could be shaped. I asked her plainly, was Helen involved? Did she help bury her daughter? Ruth didn't blink. She told David where to dig. She went quiet, then added, "When he started keeping them longer, she brought Gerald in to take the blame." I stepped forward. And Mary, what happened to her? Ruth's voice dropped. She told me she heard crying in the vents. Said Helen pinched her hard. Told her the house had rules. I told her to be brave, to pray. She turned her face away. The next week, she was gone. I asked if she ever told the police. "I told the pastor," she said. "He told me not to slander a good family." I took the drawing from the crawl space out of my coat. The one with the figures and the phrase, "She watches." I placed it on the table. "She drew this in that room," I said. "In your neighborhood. While you held a key." Ruth's eyes welled, but her mouth stayed shut. I leaned in. "You knew what was happening. You knew girls were vanishing. You sat across the street and did nothing." She nodded slowly. I thought, if I didn't speak, maybe the house would forget me. She reached toward a drawer and pulled out an old envelope. She used to mail photos, she whispered. Helen said she was building a trust file. Kids who wouldn't be missed. I asked where they were sent. Ruth hesitated. "A man. In Alabama." I never asked who. But every Christmas the letters came back. Same handwriting. Postmarked Montgomery. I took the envelope and left the house. In the car, I opened the card. 2 red birds printed on the front. Inside, 3 words written in blue ink. "Keep the door." That was it. No signature, no return address. Just a message. And a postmark. Montgomery, Alabama. As I sat there, engine off the heater fading, I heard Ruth's voice again in my mind. She took me. Not him. There was still one more child in those walls. Still waiting. Still watching. And we were just beginning to find her. The postmark on the envelope hadn't faded. December 2024. Montgomery, Alabama. No return address. Just those 3 words. Keep the door. I held it under the desk lamp and let the ink settle in my mind. It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a command, as if someone had been maintaining this pattern long after the others were dead or locked away. I logged into the state database and began a quiet background check on every known associate of Helen and David West family neighbors, former co-workers. Most of them still lived within 2 counties of Willow Lane. One name caught my eye. Caleb Ford, a deacon at Helen's church from 1977 to 1984. He'd retired early, sold his house, and moved to Montgomery in 1986. No criminal record, no official complaint, but a personnel note listed inappropriate guidance with minors as a reason for non-rehire in the parish. I pulled up old church directories. There he was, third row, always seated behind Helen. And in one faded photo from a 1981 church potluck, he stood with his hand resting lightly on the shoulder of a child I recognized, Marianne. I scanned through transportation records. He'd flown back to Ohio twice in the last 5 years, once for a funeral, once around Christmas. Both visits matched the postmarks on similar Christmas cards Ruth Delaney had stored in a drawer. I couldn't bring him in yet, not without something real, but I could go there. I requested temporary field leave through the department and booked a seat on the first morning flight south. The air in Montgomery was thick when I landed. February, but already edging toward spring heat. I rented a car and drove straight to the address listed on his most recent vehicle registration, an old duplex on the east side of town, tucked behind a chain-link fence and overgrown with vines. The windows were covered with foil. No doorbell, just a rusted knocker and a line of worn Christian bumper stickers along the screen. I knocked twice. A long pause, then the sound of locks disengaging 3 of them. The door opened 4 inches. A man in his 70s, tall, hollow-cheeked eyes too bright. "You lost?" he asked. I said I wasn't. Told him I was with the Montgomery PD, which was technically true. He hesitated, then opened the door wider. "I haven't done anything," he said. I didn't respond, just looked past him into the house. There were papers everywhere, neatly stacked, labeled in red pen. In the corner, an old TV playing static. I asked if I could come in. He paused, then without a word stepped aside. The inside of the duplex smelled like antiseptic and paper. No pictures on the walls. No furniture except a single recliner and a lamp. But on the floor, laid out carefully like a grid, were photographs. Hundreds of them, all taken from high angles through ceilings, vents, lighting fixtures. Some dated, others numbered. A few had names: Alyssa, Beth, Jody. At least a dozen matched the photos from David's darkroom. I crouched next to one and saw a faint pencil note at the bottom. She told me her name was Willa. She knew about the others. I looked up. Caleb was staring at the wall, not speaking. I asked him what "keep the door" meant. He rubbed his fingers together, then finally answered. "It was the rule," he said. "You don't trap them. You just show them the door. If they go through, that's their sin." I stood slowly. "But it was sealed," I said. "You built the walls. You installed the locks." He nodded. "So they wouldn't wander. So they'd stay pure." He turned toward me then. "Willa knew. She said she could hear the crying. She tried to write letters. I burned them." His voice didn't crack. There was no shame. No fear. I pulled out my phone and called local dispatch. Within minutes, 2 officers were en route. I didn't wait to cuff him. He didn't resist. Just sat in the recliner and looked down at his hands. As they loaded him into the squad car, he said one last thing. "You'll find the rest in the wall behind the water heater. 3rd panel from the floor." That night, search and evidence pulled 6 sealed containers from the back wall of his duplex. Inside were documents, names, and a ledger of what he called the catalog. Every child was listed with a year and a city. The last entry was from 1987. But halfway through the second binder, something stopped me cold. A sheet marked Ohio, August 1981. Willa T., age 8, under comments. Unfit. Asked too many questions. Denied transit. I flipped to the back of the file. Attached was a photograph. The same girl from the crawl space drawing. Big eyes, narrow shoulders, wearing a striped shirt. She wasn't in the missing persons database. No record of her in any school within 100 miles. Nothing. But someone remembered her. Heather. When I showed her the photo the next morning, she didn't blink. She's the one I heard she said. Not the crying, the singing, from inside the vent. I thought I imagined it. I asked when she heard it. She looked down. First night in the house, and the week after Darren left for his conference. Every night around 3 a.m., I asked what song it was. Her voice cracked just slightly. Twinkle, twinkle. That's when I realized Willa hadn't just been there. She was the voice under the music box, the one David hadn't noticed. The one Helen tried to erase. The one Caleb called unfit. She'd survived longer than any of them knew. And she'd recorded everything. But no one had ever found her body. No remains. No clothing. Just the voice. And the drawing. The next evening I returned to Willow Lane one last time. I didn't tell anyone. I just parked down the block and let myself in with the key still signed out to evidence. The light was different now, softer. The air less heavy. I walked back through the house slowly, letting my hand trace the walls, the seams, the spaces between drywall and truth. In the guest bedroom closet, I knelt and pressed my ear to the floor. For a long time, there was nothing. Then the faintest shift, like something brushing past insulation. I whispered her name. Willa. The house didn't answer. But the air changed. The temperature dropped. And then I heard it one short, sharp breath. Not pain. Not fear. Just presence. I stayed kneeling. I found the man I said. I know what they did to you. I know you tried to help the others. The floor was quiet again. Then soft as breath. She's still in there. I froze. Who I whispered. Who's still there? But the voice was gone. The air settled, and the silence returned. Not empty. Just waiting. I stood, stepped back into the hallway, and looked once more at the wall behind the laundry room. Third panel from the floor. Still untouched. Whatever was behind there, it wasn't ready to be found. Not yet, but she was. Willa wasn't finished. Not until every child had a name. Not until someone opened the last door. I didn't go back to the house for 3 days. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed to know I was seeing clearly. There's a line that forms in these cases between what's real and what's residue. Memory, sound, movement. It all leaves marks, but not all of them are physical. Sometimes you carry them in your ears or the back of your throat or under your skin. But that whisper, she's still in there, that was an echo. That was a message. I requested access to the site again, this time with a warrant for structural inspection focused on the laundry wall. The permit came through in 36 hours. I brought one forensic tech with me. Dan, someone I trusted not to overtalk the moment. He didn't ask questions, just followed my lead. We arrived just after 7. Early light coming in through the front blinds, the air sharp and quiet. I walked us through the house like I'd done a dozen times, but everything felt suspended, like the place was holding its breath. In the laundry room, I knelt by the third panel from the floor. I tapped once, twice. Hollow. Same density as the rest. But when I leaned in and pressed my palm against the baseboard, I felt it cooler air, not circulation. A pocket. Dan ran the handheld scanner across the wall and got a faint bounce inconsistent depth. No studs, no insulation, just space. I looked at him and nodded. He started carefully removing the drywall piece by piece until a small square recess appeared, just 2 feet wide. Just enough for a child. Inside was a bundle wrapped in what looked like an old sheet, yellowed at the edges, tied with plastic twine. I reached in and pulled it toward me. It wasn't heavy, but it had weight, not just in mass, but in meaning. Dan stepped back, hands steady, quiet. I unwrapped the bundle on the tarp we'd laid down. Inside was a pair of children's shoes, worn at the toes, a cracked voice recorder, and a hair ribbon blue with a tiny silver clip. Dan was already documenting, but I stopped him. The recorder still had a cassette inside, labeled in black ink, Willa, 1981. I stood there a moment, thumb hovering over the play button, then pressed. It started with silence, faint static, then breathing. A child's voice, soft, steady. "My name is Willa," she said. "If you find this, I was real." A pause. They think I'm asleep, but I can hear them talking. "David's angry. Helen says I ruined everything. She says if I don't be quiet, I'll go where Mary went." More silence. The sound of something tapping, maybe a vent, maybe a wall. Then her voice again. "I write letters, but I think she burns them. I left one behind the bricks in the vent near the big bed. If you find it, please tell my sister I tried." Static again. Then a sound I still hear clearly singing. Just the first few lines of Twinkle, Twinkle. Then it cuts off. No click, no stop. Just ends. I turn to Dan. "We need to check the main bedroom. The vent behind the bed." He nodded, already packing the bundle. Back in the master bedroom, we moved the bed frame and unscrewed the vent plate. Inside, pressed between bricks, was a folded piece of paper. Yellowed, brittle. I unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was childlike but clear. To Sarah it said, "If you ever come back, I remember your red socks. I remember when we made shadow puppets. I didn't tell. I promise." I stayed where the line was. It wasn't signed, but in the bottom corner was a tiny drawing, 2 girls holding hands, one with a bow, one with stars on her socks. I looked up the next day and found it Sarah T. age 11. Reported missing August 1981, same week as Willa. Lived just 2 streets over. Foster care placement. File said she'd run away. No follow-up. No contact since. But now I had a name. And Willa had a witness. I put in a formal request for Sarah's case file to be reopened. It was approved. Within days, a social worker flagged a match woman living under a new name in Indiana, formerly Sarah T., confirmed by fingerprint. When we made contact, she didn't hesitate. Came in 2 days later. Quiet. Wore a sweatshirt with the cuffs pulled over her hands. Sat down across from me and said I didn't think anyone would believe me. I didn't speak. Just waited. She went on. We were both placed there for a few weeks. Foster rotation. Helen said we were too loud. Said good girls stay behind the line. Her voice tightened. Willa used to hum at night. It kept me from crying. Then one morning she was gone. Just gone. I asked, and Helen slapped me so hard I chipped my tooth. I ran that night. Took the neighbor's bike. No one ever asked me why. I showed her the drawing. Her eyes welled. She used to draw that all the time. Said the stars on my socks made her feel brave. Then she said it without me prompting. There was a man who came through the vents. I think Helen called him Caleb. She hadn't seen the files. She hadn't heard the names. But she knew. And that's what finally broke the case open. Within a week, the DA's office reclassified the West home as a confirmed serial confinement site. Willa was added to the registry. So was Sarah, Mary, and 2 others' names matched from the binder found in Caleb's duplex. Some families got closure. Others, just questions. But for the first time in over 40 years, the story wasn't buried. The house on Willow Lane wasn't just haunted by rumor, it was full of names, full of records, and Willa had told the truth. She'd stayed behind the line. She'd kept the door. And she'd made sure someone finally listened. But there was one thing left. One sound I still hadn't found. That second voice on the original tape. Not Caleb. Not David. A woman. Almost a whisper. Saying no, not her. The other one. That voice didn't belong to the men. It belonged to someone still alive. Someone who'd known Willa from the inside. Someone who wasn't ready to be found. Not yet. I spent the next 2 days with the audio on loop trying to isolate the voice buried behind Willa's lullaby. It wasn't a scream or a threat. It was quiet, breathless. A woman's voice, just 6 words. No, not her. The other one. I ran it through spectrographic filtering, noise suppression, pitch correction. The waveform lined up with someone from the files, someone peripheral. It wasn't Helen, not Sarah, not anyone from the West household directly. But it did match another voice, one from a recorded phone call made in 2009 to Montgomery County Child Services. The call came from a blocked number. The transcript had been flagged as unsubstantiated, but the name given, Willa. The caller claimed to be Willa. Said she had escaped. Said the other girls were still underground. The social worker took down the information, filed a report, but with no return contact or matching case, it was shelved. That voice was still on record. And when I compared it to the background voice on the original tape, it was the same woman. 40 years apart, but unmistakable. That meant one thing: someone who knew Willa had lived long enough to call in her name. Someone who had survived. And kept silent. The call had been routed through a payphone near Canton, Ohio, 10 miles from the original foster agency that placed Sarah and Willa. I called the department there and asked for access to the old placement records. They said most of them had been scanned years ago, archived under a defunct contractor that had since dissolved. But one admin still had a local copy. Her name was Carrie James. Retired, still lived in town. I called her that afternoon. She didn't hesitate. Invited me over the next morning. Her house was small, plain, backed up against a wooded edge. Inside, everything smelled like lavender and old paper. She had the files ready when I arrived. Cardboard boxes labeled by year, organized by intake number. She said she remembered the name Willa, but couldn't place a face. I asked about the 1981 intake logs. She pulled them out. I combed through each one until I found it Willa T, age 8. Brought in after parental abandonment, placed with Helen and David West under short-term care. Then, 1 week later, placement marked as closed. Child relocated. Reason, confidentiality. That wasn't standard language. I asked Carrie if she'd seen that code used before. She nodded once. A few times, she said. Usually when something went wrong and the agency didn't want to leave a trail. She hesitated, then reached into a separate box marked Admin Correspondence. She pulled out a letter. Unofficial. No header. Just a typewritten memo dated September 3rd, 1981. Regarding the child T. Willa, we have deemed further documentation unnecessary. The foster provider has been advised. Future inquiry should be redirected to alternate listings. No signature, no follow-up, just a black line. Carrie looked at me and said, "This happened more than once." I asked her what she meant. She led me to a filing cabinet and opened the bottom drawer. Inside were 23 folders, each labeled with a first name and year. All girls, all between the ages of 6 and 10. All with placements that lasted less than 2 weeks. All marked closed due to confidentiality. She looked at me with steady eyes. "I kept them," she said, "because I didn't want them to vanish twice." I asked her if any of them had been found. She said no. Most never had missing person reports filed. No next of kin. Just names, numbers, and silence. I scanned the list. One name jumped Teresa Lynn, 1981. Intake number just 2 digits off from Willa's. I looked through the file. No placement address, no foster parent name, but one notation stuck out. Transferred under oversight of SR. Those initials matched someone from Caleb's binder. Sharon Redding, former foster assistant, worked under Helen for 3 years, left abruptly in 1982. No address, no employment records after that. But there was one clue: her old emergency contact. A woman named Beverly Stone, Canton, Ohio. I looked her up. Still living, 83 years old. I made the drive that same afternoon. When I knocked on her door, she answered slowly. Thin, small-framed hands curled from arthritis. I introduced myself, told her I was looking into a case from 1981. I asked if she remembered Sharon. Her face changed, tightened, not in fear, but in memory. "That girl brought home so much darkness," she said. I asked what she meant. Beverly stepped back and waved me in. We sat in the kitchen. She poured tea, hands shaking slightly. Sharon came to stay with me after she left the agency, said she needed time to sort herself out. But she was different. Stayed up all night. Burned all her clothes. Said the house still had voices in the vents. She stopped. Looked at me. She was scared of a little girl. Said she kept hearing her name. I asked if she meant Willa. Beverly nodded. Said Willa knew too much. Said she wouldn't go quiet. I asked where Sharon went after that. Beverly hesitated. "Last I heard, she joined a church in Pennsylvania. Real strict. Off the books. One of those retreat places with no phones, no windows." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a photo. She mailed this before she disappeared for good. Said she was finally clean. The photo showed Sharon in a plain blue dress, no smile, standing next to a wooden structure marked Sanctuary of the Fold. I took down the name and left before dusk. That night I called the Pennsylvania State Registry. The compound wasn't listed. No tax ID, no registered address, but one P.O. box matched up in the hills near Union County. I requested a site inspection. The next morning I got a call. Officers visited the grounds, found a dozen residents, all women over 50. None named Sharon. But when they walked the perimeter, they found something else. A locked shed half sunken into the ground marked archives. Inside, they found journals, dozens of them, each one labeled with a name, each name matching the girl's from Carrie's drawer. Inside, the journal marked, "Willa was a single page, handwritten. She told the truth. I did not. She sang when I wept. She stayed when I ran. I hear her now. She is not done. It wasn't dated, but the ink was fresh. That meant someone Sharon or someone like her was still writing, still recording, still listening." The next morning, a voice message came through on the department line. No name, just 4 words. "She's in the chapel, no ID, no trace, just static." But I knew exactly where to look next. They did find the chapel. It wasn't listed on any map, not even among the other compound structures. It sat about 100 yards beyond the official boundary line, sunken behind a patch of brush and half-collapsed fencing. No sign above the door, no windows, just a narrow wood frame sealed with a rusted padlock. They cut it open around 7:45 that morning. I was already waiting at the site, standing just off the gravel access road while the sun pushed slowly through the trees. Inside, the air was cool. Still. No one living. But it wasn't empty. The walls were covered in cloth-white panels stitched with names, dozens of them sewn in crooked lines, some embroidered, some marked in ink. All the same age range, all female. In the far back corner, beneath a skylight that hadn't let in sun for years, there was a single folding cot. Laid across it, arms folded neatly, was a woman in her 70s, hair cut short, shoes lined up beneath her feet. She had passed quietly. No signs of trauma. Just a small vial on the floor and a letter resting beside her. It was signed S.R. There was no apology in her words, no confession, just a catalog. What was done when it started, why it continued. Not for faith, not even for power, just habit. She said Willa had been the one they couldn't break. That every time they tried to redirect her, her word not mine, she would sing. Loud, fearless. That was why she was sealed in, because she wouldn't quiet. The records, the journals, the tapes, they were all stored beneath the chapel floor, wrapped in wax paper and tucked in heavy plastic tubs. Every girl had a folder, some with photos, others with handwritten notes. A few had locks of hair tied in twine. Willa's name appeared in 7 different logs. In every one, the final word was the same, defiant. That word stayed with me. After everything was documented and cleared, I asked to go back in alone. Just for a moment. I sat on the edge of that cot and looked at the ceiling. There were marks above it, scratches as if someone had tried to reach up long ago. I closed my eyes and listened. And in the stillness, I could almost hear it. That same low hum I'd first felt in our laundry room back home. Not the tape, not the voice, just the presence of something unresolved. We buried Willa the following week. She was given a headstone with her full name and the year she disappeared. Nothing elaborate, just clean, honest stone. The families of the other girls were contacted when possible. Some hadn't known they ever existed. Others had waited 4 decades without answers. As for me, I stayed in the house until summer, finished the floors, rewired the hallway, kept the laundry room intact. I couldn't bring myself to tear it down. It didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a marker. Sometimes late at night I'd sit by that wall and listen to the quiet. There was no fear left in it, just a kind of weight. Like the house knew it had been heard. Willa didn't fade. Her voice, her defiance, her name, they're stitched into the fabric now. Not just of that place, but of every girl who went unheard. And maybe that's the only real justice some stories get. Not a courtroom, not a sentence. Just someone finally saying, "I believe you. I hear you. You mattered." If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it, so no voice goes silent and no name gets left behind.